Good afternoon and good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining our quarterly webinar. Today, we're going to talk about the ProLinkHFA HUD Export utility. My name is Sara Surprenant. I am the customer success rep and trainer at ProLinkHFA, and most of you I've worked with on this very topic. We wanted to cover a refresher for your upcoming reporting needs through HUD. And this is very similar to some of the training that we did last year. We're going to cover some of the same topics. I'm going to go into a little more depth in a couple of areas about where to find the data and how to make sure that your data is in the ProLinkHFA system already. So when you do your reporting, you'll have less missing data and it's going to be less of a headache for you. Here's our agenda. We're going to kind of talk about the overview, as I do know that we do have some new clients who are joining for the first time this year. So some of this, again, may be just a review refresher for some of you, and some of you will be seeing this for the first time. So we'll have a break in about 35 minutes. I'm going to keep looking at my timer to keep me on track and keep me honest about these things. So let me set that timer. You won't hear it, I promise. How to find the data, which I think is like one of the biggest struggles that we all have when it comes to doing our reporting. And we do get errors about missing data. Then we're going to talk about how to create your HUD data export in ProLinkHFA. And then again, how to export your files and the error resolution that may come into play. We'll have Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions, pop those in the chat. Sam, am I correct? And they will pop those in the Q&A chat and we will review them at the end of the session.
Actually, Sarah, I said in the chat the Q&A feature, which is separate from the chat. So yeah, if you guys could just pop a question in there, that would be perfect.
Perfect. Then we'll cover those once we get to the end. Also, the recording will be available for you. We're going to stick this on our internal user group and also on our YouTube video page for ProLink Solutions, so you can watch it again. We'll add the PowerPoint to the user group work center as well. And so you can have some of that data to look at after we have our session. So first, let's talk about what the HUD export utility is. Most of your states, if you do have low-income housing programs, you do report on a yearly basis to HUD information about your projects and your tenant files. So the first thing you want to do is review the HUD data collection fields and make sure that your data is there. If you're pretty confident that the way that you've set up your data is good, that's going to be it's not going to be a time-consuming effort on your part. In most situations, the happy path of getting your data in correctly is the assumption that you have an associated tax credit deal in ProLinkHFA that is set up and connected to your portfolio property, and then your compliance programs and your bins and all those things. So that's kind of the first step in putting some data at the TCA level, so it is tied to your property. If your data has been entered correctly, then we have to verify your configuration settings are correct for your HUD reporting information that will get populated in those files. Then we will show you where the HUD export utility is in ProLinkHFA, which most of you do know. We'll talk about the required fields and how to use the export to generate your files and create the data that you're going to need to upload to HUD. There is an assumption, I am assuming that everyone is aware of how to access the HUD portal. I know that I have worked with Mike Holler to get a test login, so I can help test your HUD files before you upload them for real. And you can reach out to me and we can schedule some time to do that if necessary. They do have the option to mark your files as test files, because he knows that we all need to kind of test and make sure what's going on and make sure our data is good to go. So the first thing I want to talk about when we talk about ProLinkHFA, and anybody who has had the initial asset management training with me knows how much I like to talk about the AM characteristics page. And this is something that agencies will set up when you onboard for your reporting requirements for the property. And we have the box on the AM characteristics screen under your selected property that indicates that you're going to view some of the fields for HUD LIHTC data collection here. So when that's checked, then you're going to get this option in your selected property menu. And that's just going to allow you to actually view the data on those pages and kind of show that, yes, this is populated, this is where it comes from. And that kind of gives you an extra way to validate the information that you do have in your system. And it's important to just let you know that checking this box, that doesn't dictate whether or not that property is getting reported or not. That key specifically comes from whether or not you have an active LIHTC program on your property. And so that's how we pull the data for that. This just box, it just allows you to look for data. When you select it, it will take, and you select the HUD export, what you can do is hover over some of these fields, and they're going to tell you exactly where that data lives. So if it's missing, like, and I know that one of the most common errors we get when we do actually do the HUD upload is you're missing owner information. And so on your property, on your HUD export page for that property, you can see where this information comes from. And it just kind of tells you this is the contact information that's on the portfolio property. And we'll kind of go through this a little more granularly as we go through the training today. Other fields, I'm just showing examples here of where you hover over so you can find that data and where it comes from. And I believe I'm going to bring up a screen if I can. Let's see if this will let me. Here we go. This is what most of you know. Hopefully, Sam, if you can't see the Interagency Housing Alignment Portal, when I talk about the HUD portal, this is what I'm talking about. And I'm talking specifically about the LIHTC data collection page. This is where all the files get uploaded on a yearly basis. And in case you're not aware of what the LIHTC data collections menu and HUD offers, you have the place to upload your files, forms, and documentation. So there's a lot of documentation out here that we did use to create this functionality, and we just took it straight from the source. When we go into HFA, let me make this a little bigger. What I was talking about earlier with the, let me go over to a property with the HUD LIHTC data collection box. I'm popping over to the property from the associated TCA deal so we can look at what this looks like in real time. Here's our AM characteristics page that I love to talk about so much. It's like one of my favorite. And you can see that I do not have that HUD menu item over here because I haven't selected this checkbox. So once I select this and save it, the left menu over here, the left nav panel is going to pop up with that HUD export option to view the data. So now you can see I have the HUD export option in my left menu. And once I click on that, it's going to bring up a screen that is read-only fields, mostly read-only fields. There are some fields that are on here that you can populate if we don't have anywhere in the system for that. And again, with hovering over and finding out where that data is at, where the low income unit values come from, et cetera, et cetera. At the bottom, if you have extra information that you want to populate, you can. And this will line up with certain areas in the project file. And when you look at the project file XML, if you are inclined to do so, you'll see some of these tags and some of these fields, and you can update that data manually here if that's something you want to report to HUD. So one of the other indicators that we have, at least in property, not necessarily in TCA, once you've selected that checkbox on AM characteristics, throughout the property, you're going to see certain fields that have this little orange bar next to it. And what that means is that this data is going to be used to collect for the HUD export. So, having a random orange bar just means you've got your HUD export review page selected on your property. And these particular fields are going to filter down to that page so you can see your data. So the second thing is in your configuration settings. Most of you should have this already. I think anyone who's participating in this training, You have had your config settings updated probably when we implemented your agency, and that's already going to be populated in your system. And we're going to talk about the easiest way to find out that it's not, besides going out to look for your HUD allocating agency code. Your system administrator will need to populate that if it's not populated. If you want us to do it, you can just reach out with a support ticket if you get an error, and we can do it for you as well. And if you do not know what your code is, and I'm pretty sure you all do, you can always email my caller at HUD and ask him. And I'm sure he'll provide that information. So when you first go to, I'm going to get that out of here. When you first go to your configure or your HUD export, you'll get this error when you try to create your export if you do not have that code populated. So that's like the quickest, easiest way to find out if you're good to go there. If when you do try to create your first export and you get this, let us know. We'll help you out. Just enter a support ticket as per usual. The second thing is, I know that not everybody in your agency is going to be working on the HUD export utility. So these might be security privileges that only specific people have, which, if you don't have them, that's kind of awesome, because that means you're not responsible for completing that work. That's just one less thing you have to do. But for the person who is tasked to do this in here, at that point, you need to make sure that you do have these particular privileges. Otherwise, you're going to see the buttons disabled on the screen, or you may or may not see the menu option in your utility panel. So this is just a pop quiz. You can do this on your own, just so you can feel smart. We're not going to grade you, and we're not going to take points away if you get it wrong, because we don't know. You're just in there watching from your desk or your home to find out. So what does determine the agency's HUD allocating agency code? And we talked about that being something that needs to be in your config settings. As an agency, do you assign your own code? Do we assign the code to you? Does HUD assign the code to you, or is none of that correct? Obviously, the right answer is HUD assigns the code, because if you don't know what your code is and you get that error when you try to do your export for the first time, you would get in touch with my caller and ask him. Second question, true or false? The HUD export utility is located in the admin panel of ProLinkHFA. That is false. And that was kind of a trick question, because that's actually in the utilities panel. And so for those of you who've worked in ProLink for a while or recently had training, you know that we refer to some of those items on the left side of the screen as panels. So the HUD export utility is located in the admin panel. So now the topic that most people have asked about and reached out about is, how do you find your HUD data in ProLinkHFA? I mean, we do have the HUD export page on the property that shows those read-only fields, but sometimes we just get impatient. We may not look at that for whatever reason. So we're going to talk about some of the specific, the specifics that we need to review to find this. So we're going to start with some of the files, and we'll go over these files a little more in depth. Like, for example, we do generate the tenant XML validation file. This is an information only file that lets you know there are some conditions that might generate errors when you do the upload. This is kind of your first safety net to avoid that happening. And in the tenant XML validation file, first thing, a lot of these errors will be resolved during your compliance reviews if you finalize them and everything for the reporting year, because you would have had to get through some of these missing requirements or exceptions that say this, income is over, et cetera, et cetera. So when you generate the XML validation file, it's going to give you the property name where the error is happening or where the error could happen and where the offensive field is. It's also going to show you the BEN and the specific unit number. So this should allow you to very easily go over and make some edits. For example, tenant paid rent 5125, that is over. Last year it was 4K. That was kind of the limit. And the only change that I'm aware that HUD is making this year is they've increased that value to 5,000. So if your tenant paid rent or gross rent per unit is over a total of 5,000, it's going to generate an error when you upload. But if you see this in your tenant XML validation file, this will give you a chance to go back to the property and the unit and review the data, and then possibly reconcile that with the owner agent to make sure that nobody accidentally put in the wrong number. Because, we get excited, we type, we add some numbers, this happens. This will allow you to review those and get those corrected before you actually upload your tenant files.
Hey, Sarah, let me interrupt you real quick. We just got a question from Petty. How do you generate an XML validation file?
We're going to get to that.
Okay.
This is coming. We're talking about there's I feel I am being repetitive and redundant on purpose, just because I feel immersive is great, so we can kind of tell the difference between what the files do. But we will definitely go into more depth on this one. Then we have the missing data file. Once you generate this and it tells you what's missing, you can look at this again. It's going to give you the property name and the HFA number, and kind of be very descriptive on what's missing. Again, for this particular example, we have a place in service date that hasn't been set. There's a really good chance that if you've already, entered tenant events and done your review, your compliance review for the reporting year, it's going to tell you that. You're not going to be able to finalize a review until you have a lot of these missing data things fixed. Like, it will specifically tell you have the compliance review has missing requirements. So you would go back to that compliance review and be like, oh, okay, we didn't finish this. We didn't submit it. We didn't finalize it. One of the most common ones is, even if you've done evaluation, but you haven't finalized for whatever reason, your tenant event submission status still needs to be submitted. And when we talk about tenant event submission status, that's separate from like compliance overall status, or your compliance review is in process or pending. The tenant event submission status is just your basic, this needs to be changed to submitted. That's what this little these errors are talking about. And if your owner agents are submitting them through the tenant portal, whether it's XML or they've manually entered these, once they submit, that's going to get updated anyway. But sometimes we go back and you set it back to pending, so the owner agents can go back in and make some adjustments on their validation errors, or they have to resubmit, or they forget to do the last submit step for whatever reason. Sometimes you will find this tenant event submission status lingering in pending status. So if it tells you that it hasn't been submitted, you can change this to submitted, and that'll be one way to get past those errors. The project XML file. And again, we're going to show you how to generate all these, but I just kind of want to make sure that you have the differences of the files kind of in your head. The project XML file is going to talk about, is going to generate information for properties that were placed in service in the reporting year. And I'm sorry, I have a cat that apparently needs to be pet here. So I have kind of gone through, and what I did is I took out the actual XML from one of the files that we generated, and I added just some little color-coded blurbs here next to each XML line or tag. And when you open an XML document, you're going to see all the line numbers, and it's important, if you are familiar with XML and you're comfortable reviewing your files, when you get an error when you upload those, it's going to tell you what line number it's on and whatever XML editor that you're using. And so that's convenient when you get one of those errors, like, oh, okay, a lot of times you may have a bin missing or a zip missing, and it'll tell you what line, and you can look in that and see if it's there. You can also create data views to help you kind of have your own like HUD data views just for this specific time of year when you need to go out and verify data. So you don't have to like search through a lot of things, just bring it up and say, okay, what's missing? Like if you have a HUD ID missing or something like that, you can use your HUD data, create a HUD data TCA data view just to keep reviewing that. Because right here, I talk about the edit TCA deal HUD pen, and you can see here that for this particular property, it is, it has been populated. Kind of the same thing with your portfolio properties. There's going to be some information with the physical addresses in cities and states that needs to be populated. And we kind of talk about this is where this comes from. When I say this comes from edit property, you could go to the edit property page and verify all this data is populated, or you can just kind of create a data view and use that as you're verifying the data that you have. Then we talk about edit TCA building. This, again, when I talk about in a perfect world, you're gonna, have your TCA deal information that has the bins and addresses populated on it. And that's where this project file is going to pull that information from. So if you're missing any of that data, you can just kind of have a HUD info on your TCA buildings and verify what's missing. Like here you can see we have some cities missing and the zips missing. So those might be things you have to go back and add to make sure that your project XML file is complete. And your project XML file seems to be the biggest file that we have, with a lot of little bits and pieces. And it can be a little finicky. It can be a little precious. So again, this is just a screenshot. And as I mentioned before, we'll upload this PowerPoint. We'll make a PDF out of it, so you'll have visuals of what this looks like. Edit property, obviously this is where that information comes from, and the HUD pin comes from the edit TCA deal. When you go there and you'll find the HUD pin information. Edit TCA building, this is your address and zip information that are referred with the first snippet of the XML file, and then you'll have your bin. HUD doesn't care about some of this, but some of it does, and we'll cover that as well. And this is, again, the TCA building. You can bring up your own data view just specifically for HUD info, like HUD info verification, and look for your property that might be giving you an error. The second snippet, again, is one of the biggest errors that I think most people receive when they do their first upload. And we talk about like the owner information. And then the TCA deal current stage has information that sometimes does not get populated if you're not maintaining information on your TCA deal. One way you can look at that for your total TCA units on a deal is add this information to your HUD data TCA data view that you might use, because this is actually pulling from your TCA current stage. And let me pop over here and show you what that looks like. And I'm not sure why they bring in like two different values where you have them coming from two different places, but on your TCA current stage, you're going to have this unit info that shows up in the overview, but that gets populated on current stage. So you can see here that I have total units, and then I have number of low income units here. And that is where this information does come from. So you can see that the 38 got pulled from this field. So that's kind of how you do the reconciliation with your data views and the actual data in the system. Then for the property owner information, here we have, you can do just a property owner data view if you want to, and it's going to give you the owner name and the contact information, where that comes from. So what that's going to look like when you go to your property, and we'll hop back over here, the things that you have to make sure that you do have. That's going to live on the property entity screen. So if you get an error saying, the owner information is not there, it's on this line, it's missing, where you would go is you would go to property entities in your ownership structure tab to make sure that you have the owner entity with the owner role of parent owner. That's the one that's going to show up on your export information, and the contact. So every owner does need a contact, and where that's going to come from. And there's a slide that covers this. You guys know that I go back and forth between the system and the slides, and sometimes I get ahead of myself on this one. But if you don't have a contact for whatever reason, you might want to reach out and get that, because when it comes to the information needed for the file, we definitely need the name of the owner and the base entity type. It's going to pull in their direct phone information that does have to be populated, along with their address information. The contact is going to live on the associations tab. And so if you don't have someone listed as a contact with their information, that is where you would add that to the entity. But I believe that most of our agencies do have that information already in the system. The one thing that might be missing is you might not have selected a contact for the owner entity. And you'll know that you didn't do that because you're going to get an error message when you upload your project file to HUD. So this is just what I kind of went over. It shows you this is what the owner entity is going to look like, where the direct phone and the mailing information is as well. Some other information on that snippet too. It's like if there's a mount issued from a signed cycle, if you need to populate that, this is where that's going to come from. I don't think you get any errors because I'm not sure. That's kind of one of those stickler things when you upload. And then again, we talked about TCA current stage, that number of low income units is going to come from there. So the third file, the third snippet I've brought from the project XML file talks about like the percent of AMGI is going to be a 1 for 50 and 2 for 60, and that's going to come from your bin on the property. So you have your bin set up on the property, it's going to pull the data from there. Same thing with the placed in service. It's going to pull information based on your buildings that are placed in service in concert with your LIHTC program that has been active. Now, if you don't have place and service dates and they're missing, but you did get an allocation, it's going to pull this date, the year project received allocation or bond issued, from an 8609 that's been issued. Whoops. Credit percentage is going to come from the edit compliance program. This is a drop down field. So I think if you have, 4 or 9 or a mixture, that will populate there. There are other fields that you may or may not have populated for reporting. And this kind of talks about if you have a nonprofit sponsor, if you have tax exempt bond financing, it comes from line 4 on the 8609 if it's greater than 0. And some other little places you can populate information on edit TCA current stage. We have some information on the edit portfolio property enhancements tab, as well as that lower section in the HUD export that I talked about that you might want to fill out for additional data. Ooh, I have a new mouse with a little track wheel. So that's what that was. And the last part of the project XML file snippet, I just broke this up into 4 sections since it's such a big file. If you have any specific population data, it's going to come from this little section right here where I talk about families, elderly, etc. It's going to come from here, from your edit portfolio property and your population data tab. If you have things selected here, it's going to show up here. I don't think this is the same property I was using, but if it says 1, that means you have something checked in one of these items. And if you don't have anything checked, it's going to be a 2. So it's kind of like, some of the XML data that gets reported is a 1 for yes and a 2 for no based on flags that we have set in the system if those have been selected. Federal enhancements is, similar. If you have this checked, it's going to show some information there in your LIHTC project file. And then your no longer monitored file is kind of the easiest file you got. Basically, all it cares about is your compliance end date. So if your compliance end date is in the reporting year, then it's going to show up in your file. That's the, no muss, no fuss file that we use. The tenant zip file data, all that information is going to come from your tenant events. And the most important thing about that is when you generate the files, and again, we're going to get to that in one of the next sections. When you do generate these files, you're going to get a zip file, and you have to take each individual file out of that zip file and upload them all separately to HUD, to the HUD site. You can't upload the zip file. I'm fairly certain that the HUD software will be like, that's a no-no. You can't do that. And a lot of this stuff, again, because you've already done your tenant events, you've brought them in, you've evaluated, there's a good chance you've resolved all your exceptions and it's ready to go. It's just taking basic tenant data that's already required to be in our system in order to run your evaluations. So the only issues you might see is through the tenant XML validation file, where you might have some amounts for rent or maybe some income that is way over the expected amount that HUD would allow you to use in your files when you import them to their site. So that was relatively quick. We only went for 30 minutes, but we are going to take a quick 10-minute break. This will give you a chance to just kind of, if you have any questions coming up that you want to add to the Q&A, please do. If you want to kind of look at some things in the system before we get to our next agenda items, you can do that. But we'll just plan on coming back in 10 minutes, and I'm going to set my timer. Maybe. And just kind of be back here at 12:35 Mountain Time, 1:30, or I'm sorry, 12:45 Mountain Time, 1:45 Central Time, and 2:45 Eastern Time, and 11:30 or 11:45 PST. Okay, so hopefully we're all coming back in from our very, very quick break. We do have some questions in the Q&A that I'll address when we get through the presentation, and then we'll talk about what those questions are. I know one question will be answered before we're done with our training. So let's continue to our next slide. How to create your HUD data export. And I think this is specific to what Patty was asking. So we've talked about where the data lives, where to find it, how to find out if it's populated. And so the next step is to actually go into the HUD data export. And when you go into that screen, it's going to have your red asterisk telling you that you have to enter this information in order to generate your export. Oh, I just went back really too quickly right there. And so you do have the options of file types. You can do all of them at once, or you can just do either the project XML file or the no longer monitored file or tenant zip file. And generally, the first time out, most agencies I've seen, you just do it all when you're first prepping to do your review and your upload, and then you just go from there. But you don't have to do them all at once if you don't want to. Here's your options: projects no longer monitored, and tenants. You have to enter your data collection year. And then you're going to have different, statuses when you start doing your export. Pending means, you've clicked export, it's thinking about it. It should generate an email to you. I think we have a bug, and I think Katie, you had mentioned that the email wasn't generating. Sometimes it doesn't take too long, depending on how many properties that you have placed in service during the year, or how many tenant events you have. Some agencies have so much more data than others, and it might take a little long. And, you can step back or go take a break or go get some coffee or whatnot and come back. And you don't want to refresh the page. And we'll go through a live demo of what this looks like. Because if you refresh the page when you're still on the page to try to update the status, it's going to rerun it. And so we don't want to refresh the page, because it's going to do what we call a post back, and it's going to process that entire thing again. Completed is your favorite, because then it doesn't have any errors or anything. With errors, it's going to show you, it'll have like a missing data file or a missing or the tenant XML validation file to show you what's missing. And canceling means, what you can do that is you can go through some of these and mark them as canceled. After you've gone through the exercise of getting your files where you want them, once you have them finalized, you can mark the other ones in your HUD export as canceled, just so you know these are not the files that you use to do the upload. And again, once the export is completed, if you're the person who generated the export, you should get an email saying, hey, this is done, and you can go look at it. If your project data file or your no longer monitored file is empty, that is acceptable if you've not entered any projects, you haven't placed in service any projects during the reporting year or the data collection year, or if you just haven't had any properties or projects that have reached the end of their compliance period during the reporting year, data collection year. So now if you know that there should be one and then there's not, then let us know, and we'll help you hunt down which one is not behaving and needs to be added to the export. So before we go to the pop quiz, I'm going to bring this up and show you what it might look like. So this is, you can kind of see all the times I've gone through and I've generated these files. So for this particular exercise, what I want to do right now is I'm just going to do all of them. And this year we're reporting on 2022. So I'll just enter 2022 and hit create export. Hopefully it's going to be slightly happy about this. And now it's pending. And then it will tell you in our little here, you will receive an email when it's completed. Now, instead of staying here and refreshing, what I do is I just click on this again in the menu item, because that's going to refresh the screen. and it's not going to generate the file again. So as you can see, this is really quick. Now for this particular environment for the reporting year, I don't have any finalized compliance reviews. So that's where you're not seeing the tenant XML validation file or the tenant zip file. But if I go down and I can do, for example, let's see, if I pull for 2021, we'll kind of go through what that file is going to look like. So let me do a tenant file just for 2021 and hit the create export. This might take a second because there might be some more data in there. This is just going to generate probably the XML validation file and the tenant zip file. So again, I'm not going to refresh. I'm just going to click on the menu option in my utilities panel to get that to refresh. It's still processing. So I went from pending to processing. It's thinking about giving me some data, which is very nice. And I'll give it just another minute and we can kind of look at some of the other files while we're going through this. In the meantime, let's look at our missing data file. And this is going to be pretty specific to the project. So once you click on the missing data file, and it's again, this is just informational. This is not a file that you're going to upload to HUD. When you open it in the Excel spreadsheet, it's going to give you a list of what is not so good in your data. And in this example, I have what we talked about earlier about some of these have not been submitted for the compliance review. And again, because this is test data, so it's not as clean and perfect as your normal day-to-day data. It's just going to tell me these have not been submitted. So to resolve that, I need to go back and verify the tenant event submission status to make sure that's submitted and that everything else is good to go. In this particular example, I haven't put a county or jurisdiction on the buildings. And in a normal chain of events, I would have imported my tenant events for that property and run the evaluation. And at that time, it would have said, hey, you don't have these counties. And I would have gone back and reconciled that before running the evaluation again. So this is, again, you know, we have your compliance evaluations that will tell you a lot of these things. And then we have this particular file that will let you know if you missed any of, like, you know, the first safety step, just to make sure that you have all the data in there that you need. I'm going to click on this again and see if we have our HUD, our tenant XML validation file. So this is kind of where I just selected the events for the previous year for an example. So this is telling me that I've got some XML validation data that's missing. So even though it does generate the HUD LITEC data tenant data file that would be used to upload, and it will have all the collection of files, all the tenant events, when I get a file for this, that's telling me that I'm missing data and my tenant data is not complete. So when I do click on this and I bring up this particular spreadsheet with the data in there, it's going to give me some more information that ahead of time, so we don't have to worry about getting these errors when we get to HUD. Now, I can tell you a lot of these is just test data. I don't anticipate that you would get anything like this if all your data is good. Let's kind of get this to come out here. Oh, hello. Let me make these bigger. They're all kind of. There we go. So in some of these, I have I don't have a value in them. Again, this is data and my test data is not the best. So I don't anticipate you having those kind of problems. We can kind of break out a little one right here. This one, the bin element is invalid. I have a bin that doesn't have a value. Down here, you're going to see a couple of messages that say tenant paid rent is invalid. Negative is a negative number. You can't have negative numbers. We have another tenant paid rent that is over $5,000. So this would be the situation where you would go back. Now, for tenant paid rent being negative, again, I believe this is just testing data. I don't believe that you would have that in your system. We don't really validate anything against it. As long as some of the data in tenant events has values, we don't care. But at this point, it's going to come back and say this value is in the system and you need to talk to the owner agent about updating that. At that point, I know when we talk about tenant events that it's important to make sure the owner agents are the ones who enter that data. In a situation like this, if you just call them up on the phone and say, hey, on this unit for this property, we have a tenant rent of -81. Is that correct? If it's not, what is the correct value? I'm going to make an edit and make a note in the system that I updated it as per this conversation. Or you have the option of going in and setting those tenant events, if they're not finalized, back to pending, or unfinalized it, set it back to pending and ask the owner agent to enter the data themselves. Regardless of which way you do it, at least if they enter it themselves, that'll be captured in the audit history. And if you do the update for them, because it's just quicker than easier than going through the whole process again, you can just make a note that as per your conversation with them, or have them send you an email and add that file to the compliance review that you change that for them. But this is how this will come up when you have tenant event data that needs to be reconciled before you regenerate the tenant file to upload to HUD. And let me bring my PowerPoint back up. No, we'll go in the project data file. We went through the missing data file. We've gone through the XML data file again. These two are informational only, these two files. This is the one that we added last year to assist with the tenant event data, because I know a lot of agencies were having issues with things getting kicked back. And so it was just easier to give you a heads up before you upload that file than to have you keep going through and correcting everything and hoping that you got it right. So here is my project data file. And we talked about this. We have the snippets from this where I've added just a little bit of additional information about how to find it. Here's your line numbers to find out what's going on when you get your, if you get errors when you do your upload. And you can, the XML data file is just going to be one file. And it could be a big file depending on how many unit or how many projects you've placed in service that year. I believe for this particular exercise, I just have the one. So we didn't have a big, huge, gigantic file. And then for our HUD LIHTC projects no longer monitor data, you can open it, you can just look at it and go, okay, look, here's the one that I have that's not monitored anymore. And then you just go to the HUD website and upload that file, the XML file, and you're done with that. That again is the easiest one. So let's talk about the pop quiz. We talked about this earlier, and again, just play along at home. What fields are required to run the utility? Which file types are required? So let's kind of look over here and cheat a little bit. I'm going to say file type and data collection here because that looks like what we have there. And that is the answer. It is C. The HUD export history grid includes a link to a log file that includes the details about the export process. That is true. And over here on one of the ones that I did, it gives you the option to download the full log. It'll bring up a text file. You just click on the download and bring it up. And if there's anything going on, it might tell you. When you get an error retrieving income limits, that generally means there is a project that has an active compliance program that has buildings that are active that do not have a county on it. And again, this should have been taken care of when you did your compliance review evaluations and had received a missing requirement message. At that point, that would have been your key to go update the county. So if you've done all that due diligence before we get here, this won't happen. You won't see this and you shouldn't get an error file. But because it's my test data, I know that I do have it. So that was true. And what happens when you run the utility? Exports automatically downloaded to your computer. A link to the export file is included in the HUD export grid. The export files are transferred to HUD, all of the above. It's just going to be B. Unfortunately, we don't have the awesome technology to automatically download those files to your computer and just magically send them to HUD. Yeah, maybe someday. With the way AI is going, who knows what's going to happen next. But all we do with this is just a data pull is what it is. And it just takes the data in the system, puts it in a format that allows you to do your reporting to HUD. And it's just going to give you a link to that export file. And once you open it, you save it to your computer. Not automatically, you manually have to do that as a human being. And then you would take those files and go to the HUD site and then upload those to HUD for your state agency. So here's the big one, and this is the one that drives us all crazy. I know that some of you on this call or who will be watching the recording, we've spent quality time together going through and resolving the errors, and you get them on your HUD export, and it's fine. I know the first year I did this, that's where I learned how the tips and tricks to how this works and how to resolve them and where everything is located. So it all eventually kind of comes together, and you know, the more you realize where the data is, the easier it's going to be for you to know, okay, I know what this particular error means and I know how to fix it. And I know what data needs to be populated. So again, being kind of redundant and repetitive, but we're talking about how to export files that ProLinkHFA generates. These are informational only. And we talked about that. The tenant XML is going to show, you know, here's some of the data that is not updated on your tenant events for a property, and here's some data that is missing from other areas of just the property, not necessarily the tenant files. Your project XML file, no longer monitored file, and tenant zip file, these are going to be the files that you have to provide to HUD. So when we talked about the tenant XML data file showing the errors, this is what we were talking about when things that have to be fixed, like a -81, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know. This is a file that we generated. I don't think HUD gave us these errors because they're, you know, we'll kind of look through what those look like a little bit, but these are going to be very similar to what the HUD site's going to show you if you have a value that needs to be fixed. And as I mentioned earlier, the $4,000 limit's been increased to $5,000. So we'll be making that change. But that's something to keep in mind, that they have increased those limits, and that might be something on a tenant event that has to be updated. And if you have to update it, like in that example, we have, hey, this particular property and this particular unit for this event, it's got a tenant paid rent that's insane. So there's a good chance that this should have been like $512.50. And either, you know, the owner agent accidentally added a zero and mistyped it in their property management system, or when they manually entered it, they could have mistyped it as well. So at that point, get in touch with the owner agent about how we're going to reconcile this value so you can get that off your tenant XML validation files, a possible error from when you submit to HUD. Missing data file, we talked about this again with the redundancy. These are going to allow you to fix some things before you upload your information, because you want everything to be complete when you report to HUD. So the missing data is letting you know this information should be in there for this particular information that you're reporting on. So you kind of want to make sure that all this is taken care of. So all the data that you're providing to HUD is as true and complete as possible. And again, I've mentioned this repeatedly, a lot of the missing data information will get caught when you do your compliance review evaluations prior to finalizing your reviews for the data collection or reporting year. So we've gone through this again. Project XML data file, properties of the building where the place and service date falls in the year and in the data collection year. No longer monitored file. Again, you're going to look at your compliance end date. You can do a compliance program data view for that. And that's going to show you what should show up in your no longer monitored file. Tenant zip file, again, we talked about it and how you have to open your zip file, export all of the individual XML files through your computer, and then upload them one by one. And I don't know if you can do like a, you know, hit upload and do them all at once. I think you have to do them one at a time. So quick pop quiz, playing along at home. what the files do and the definition of each file. Missing data file. That one's going to show the properties that have issues, such as when the compliance review has not been evaluated or it has missing requirements on there. On the project XML file, all properties that have a place in service date in the data collection year that were not previously reported to HUD. Then we have our no longer monitored file. That's going to show the properties where the compliance program is LIHTC and compliance end date is in the data collection year. Because the HUD export does not care about your home programs. It does not care about your additional set-asides. It does not care. All it cares about is your LIHTC program that is on your property in ProLinkHFA. Tenant zip file, all the tenant events that have been captured for the data collection year for all the properties that have LIHTC currently active during the data collection year. And then we have the XML validation, which is just showing missing or incorrect data from tenant events, like any rents that go over HUD's amount or anything that has a negative value, as those are not allowed by HUD. So for the projects no longer monitored XML, you can get your HUD IDs in here if you don't have them for the LIHTC HUD user.gov database. Again, most of you are familiar with those, but there's a link to it in our PowerPoint in case you need to get to it. Then we have the HUD ID and HUD PIN. HUD ID is in the database and the link on the previous slide. And the HUD PIN, if you have it, is a number given to the property by your agency. That's kind of an internal thing. So here's what the errors look like when you get them after you're in the HUD system and you have uploaded your file, and then it say, hey, you have an error. So it's going to give you a line number, and that's the line number on your XML file. The column number is just, I'm not even sure how it defines what a column is in XML. I'm not sure. And so there's a lot of gobbledygook in here that doesn't make any sense to anybody, but you know, it's basically saying something in this file, and it looks like it's your tenant file. There's a value for the property that is on this line of the XML file that exceeds the amount of $4,000. Now, this again should have been caught with the XML validation file, and it looks like, yes, this file, this example I have is from 2019, before we had that XML validation file in place. So currently, this kind of error that was received on upload would have been caught with the tenant XML validation file and would not be generated, because that would have been reconciled before we uploaded that to the HUD website. And this is where this one is a, oh, here, yeah, this is from the project XML file. This is a lot of fun. This is where you can see that you have, you know, various items are missing. And it's, again, it's kind of not super user friendly, indicative of where you need to look. But if we can look at this one right here, it's like we know that in the project XML file, there's a line 19. And let me see if I can just bring up an example, because this might work for us for what we need right here. Even though I just have one. So when it talks about going into invalid content was found starting with element annual tax credits allocated, one of a bin and bin address was not received. So it's kind of calling out. It looks at this down here on line 56, because this is the actual tag that error mentions. And I know this is just a very brief primer on how to, you know, evaluate and interpret what these errors mean, but it's telling you there's a bin missing. So if you've uploaded a project XML file and you get the bin and bin address, it's expected error, that means in your project XML file, you're not going to have this stuff in there. And it's basically telling you, you got to go back to your TCA deal and make sure that at least the bin and the street from the address one field is populated on that TCA building record. Let's see what else we got in here. Phone number, your phone number format. Again, this is very weird. It's like, what does this mean on line 122? Valid is not facet valid. I don't know what that means as a normal human being. It's the phone, the optional phone value is not populated correctly. And so this is kind of the format they want them to have. If it's not, if you don't have a phone number, that might show up. If you have a phone number that's less than 10 digits, you might get that error. But it's the only thing you can really take away from this error is there's a phone number issue. And I think those are all, whoops, I think those are all the examples I have on that particular page. And they're all the same. A lot of times you're going to get owner's representative, bin and bin address. And that's just like, look at the owner representative tag, look up. It's missing the bin and bin address because that's expected. Now, again, some of these seem really simple when you go into the XML, but if that's not something you're comfortable with and you don't want to spend time trying to tag it down, just put in a support ticket or email me directly and I'll enter a support ticket so I can work on it. We can set up a meeting to talk about how to resolve these and go through this in a more one-on-one manner so we can, you know, attack it together. Everybody who has, you know, done any of this training with me knows that there's a good chance that you'll be driving and I'll be backseat driving and kind of telling you so you can kind of get that muscle memory of like, I remember how to update these. I remember where I'm supposed to go. And again, this is something you all have to do once a year. And so being able to remember all the little ins and outs and tips and tricks every year, I don't think that can be expected with all the other job responsibilities you have. But that's why we kind of provide this training to kind of just gently remind you. And then again, let you know if you don't want to, you know, tackle this by yourself, let us know. We can assist. Or if you are going to be training someone else to do this because you're getting this particular responsibility off your plate, I can sit with you and any new hires or newly tasked person to do this, and we can go through that together. So that is all for the initial presentation. Let's talk about the Q&A because I know we have some questions and I see them. And Sam, I'm gonna address these one by one. Let me ask Patty. Did you see we generated the XML validation file? I'll bring up my screen. He just asked, and this was the initial question. I promised we'd get to it and we did. So the XML validation file is going to get generated when you either do the all and your tenant events have some issues, or if you just do your tenants alone, and it's going to come up, but it could bring in the LITEC validation and missing data when you just pull in your tenant zip file. And Patty, if that didn't answer your question, feel free to type in another follow-up question in the Q&A window. Lenore has asked if there a data view that shows the HUD LITEC data collection fields from like the HUD export page on the property. No, there's not. And I have an idea for a feature item I will be adding after this meeting that will have that. Now, technically, we could spend some time creating a custom data view that would bring in all of those fields. And that might be something that we do, but that would take a little bit of time, but it's not impossible. All because we don't have it now doesn't mean we can't have it later. Katie is asking on the tax exempt allegation type, can you clarify with the drop-down options? Yes, Pat. Oh, hold on. Let me get through this one question. So Katie was asking about a specific pick list, the tax exempt type, allocation type. Katie, I think this is what you mean. These are values that you can enter yourself because none of them are system values. So if you're looking in your environment and you have more than one option, then that's something that you can either make an active values, because we don't have any, I think, that are the same in here, unless we have like an ACK rehab, we have a new construction / rehab. These are customizable by your agency based on what you want to use. And then, yes, Patty, if when we're on the HUD, Patty asked if the XML validation data only generates if the tenant files have errors. That is correct. If you do your data export on your tenant file and all you get is this, and you don't get this or this, you take the rest of the day off because you don't have any errors on your tenant file, which, you know, the moment of truth will be when you do actually upload them to the HUD website and find out if indeed But there should, the XML validation is pretty good about kind of catching everything before we get it to HUD. Does anybody have any other questions? We are finished up. I scheduled this for 2 hours because I wasn't sure how much time that we would need for questions. Is there anything else that anyone would like to review or go over again? Additionally, before we end this for the day, and you get an hour and, well, you get 45 minutes back, not a whole hour. I will say that that ticket for the emails to let you know when your XML export's ready, that will be worked on. But in the meantime, just remember what I told you about the trick is like if you've gone ahead and you've done your, I'm gonna create my export. And it's in pending, you can walk away for a minute, you can come back. Do not refresh. Do not do that. Big no. Just go back over here and click on this because that's just going to refresh the screen and bring back, if it's pending right now, if it's still working through it, it's going to say it's processing, but this is completed. So this has come back and that's done. Even though I did get an email, I can go back and do click on the HUD export utility in the menu again to make sure that it's completed. So this will be our last call for questions. I don't see any. All right.
Sarah, one more just came in from Katie.
Oh, you're Katie. Katie's asking me to double check the tax exempt allocation type drop down as a pick list where certain values can be made inactive. Let's make sure I have the right pick list, Katie. That is a fair question. So let me go back over here. Tax exempt type. So let's see if I can find, that may be the wrong one. So let's find out. And allocation type. I don't think it's this one. Nope. Katie, if you are looking at it right now, can you remind me exactly what screen that drop down is on? I know I should know it by memory, but I've been digging in here for a while and I can't really remember. Seems like in years past, the import was showing as a missing value and I had it selected. Bear with me for a second. Let me, I'm going to go over here on my other screen and bring up my other spreadsheet that has some information in it. Take a look. I'd like to open. Thank you. Looking. I'm being quiet because I'm thinking that's like the only time I'm quiet. Tax exempt allocation type. Next. Okay. Katie, are you talking about, is this on the project file or the tenant file? Ah, thank you. We're going to go over to the TCA current stage. And I know I probably had that marked in my presentation, but I haven't memorized it. Very close though. That's why I have these cheat sheets. They're just as much for me as they are for you. Use Honey project. Katie, is this the one that you're talking about? And that's in the project file. Okay. So let me look at my cheat sheet and my notes on this that are a little more specific. I need to get rid of these objects. Let me get back to you on this, Katie, because I'm holding out the inevitable of us ending this, and I want to go through some of my notes to make sure that I explain it more in depth. And I will also update the training presentation with that information before I upload it for everybody, so that question is answered. Will that work? I assume that's a yes. Mine looks different. Okay. Awesome. Thank you, Katie. So any more questions? Okay, so if there's no more questions, I assume that sometime in the next few weeks, everybody's getting their assignments from HUD about when they have to upload. Please reach out with a support ticket if you need any help with anything. I know I do have a meeting with one person from one of our agencies in the first week of August. Just as a personal note, I'm going to be out like the 13th through 19th of August, and the last few days of August, I'll be on vacation. But if you put in a support ticket, someone else should be able to help you. And the first week of the 13th and 19th, I'm literally out of the country and I will not be checking email. But at the end of the month, I can't promise that I won't be checking email, because I might, just to make sure that everything's going okay. Or if, I'm out, Jessica can't assist you, she'll text me and be like, can you log into the computer? And I'll say, okay. Because I know how important this is for you guys to get off your plate. And I know that sometimes it's complicated. So thank you very much for your time. And again, I will update our PowerPoint with the answer for the information that Katie's asking about to make that a little more clear. And we'll look forward to seeing you at another webinar in the future. And I'll look forward to working with you all once we are in full swing with our HUD reporting for the year. Thank you. Sam, you can do whatever that fancy Zoom stuff that you do.
All right, sounds good, Sarah.
Thank you.